Good morning, guys. All in Crypto here, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another YouTube video. This is going to be our daily cryptocurrency market update. A little bit push for time today, so we're going to try and keep it short and sweet. We're going to be going into what unfolded yesterday with the Federal Reserve, and markets actually sold off after 75 basis points were announced. You know, there's always that little bit of extra pricing in that takes place. You know, going into something, people may be 60% sure that something's going to happen, price that in accordingly, and when they actually get the news, they'll kind of position again. But essentially, markets actually have rallied on the other end of that, and it doesn't make much sense. I just want to start with this article from CNBC. Stocks jump after Powell signals Fed will stay tough on inflation. Dow snaps 5-day slide. What about that? What about the Fed staying tough on inflation gave markets relief? It does not make a lot of sense to me at all. And for me, you know, this is not a clear bottom. We've often spoke about the long-term regression bands and how typically this has been a good entry point for the markets, and also your 200 weekly moving average. The real issue here is, has Bitcoin ever been in a similar situation to what it's currently going through? The answer, I would argue, is it hasn't. We've spoken about the bond market. I mean, if you look at yields right now, they're continuing to climb. Nothing about this is normal in terms of the bond market. In terms of, you know, the last nearly 3 years of our life now, nothing about it has been normal. And to expect Bitcoin to act like it previously has, I think potentially is a little bit naive. Ultimately, you guys know we are looking to enter the cryptocurrency market again. But for me, I'm really taking a cautious approach given everything that's going on currently. We did a video on the Nasdaq yesterday where we were looking at the run-up from 1990 to the dot-com boom, and the run-up that the Nasdaq's had from 2008, the bottom in 2008, all the way up to the highs in November. Very, very similar, which means there could be a lot more downside for the likes of the Nasdaq and a lot more pain coming for markets across the board. And I think when you look at the kind of economic backdrop, the macro, it very much looks that way. You know, it's not just the US that are upping interest rates. We've got the likes of the Bank of England doing the 5th straight rate hike as growth and the pound wobble. We've got the Swiss National Bank doing an unexpected rate hike by 0.5 point. We've also got, I believe, the ECB. Yesterday, they were talking about coming up with a new way to deal with the bond market, which is certainly interesting. I'll need to dive a little bit more into that. But across the board, guys, you know, it doesn't look good. And we've maintained the bias that this does not look like a bottom yet. Doesn't mean that it's not. It just means that so far, you look at when a market bottoms, by the way, there's not enough data there to suggest that whatsoever. And in fact, markets typically don't bottom in this kind of a fashion. You could say, okay, well, it looks similar to March 2020. But that was a real capitulation event, just like back here in May, you know, when Bitcoin had gone to 64K and then sold off. That was capitulation for all intents and purposes. A downtrend bottoming looks similar to what we had in 2019. Or prior to that, you know, you can see this nice rounded bottom. You know, and this is what I mean. It's very much too early to tell if this is the bottom. But given the macro backdrop, I would suggest it's not. And I'm just very, very cautious. Certainly when we look into everything going on now. Celsius could trigger a crypto crash, says Huobi Group CFO. Bitcoin wobbles but doesn't break post-rate hikes. And again, it doesn't make a lot of sense that the market rallied on a 75 basis point rate hike. That doesn't make really much sense to me at all, because if you understand intrinsically what interest rates do for the dollar and its demand, you know, you'll get that this is going to go significantly higher. Certainly when you compare it to your other currency markets, it's not a great picture, I don't think, across the board. And I'm trying not to be bearish. Ultimately, you guys know that I am not bearish on crypto. I think in terms of percentages, it's going to be the best performing asset class over the next 5 years. And it has been really up and since Bitcoin's inception in 2008. But when you think about 2008, Bitcoin's never really been in this situation. You know, it was born And Satoshi's white paper essentially came out when, or some of the early manuscripts with Satoshi was talking about how there was the second round of stimulus for the banks in England. So if you understand what that means, essentially Bitcoin's had throughout its history from 2008 onwards, a very supportive and stimulating economy, a very inflationary economy. Right now, you're in a kind of restrictive economy. And this is why, even though we look at the long-term regression bands and we look at the 200 moving average, and we've said that these are probably not bad entry points, historically, that may prove to be the case when we look back at this time period. But at the same time, for me, it's all about optimizing my entry into this space, back into this space, and really setting myself up for the most amount of ROI possible moving forwards. And I don't think that point is here. Could be, but we'll have to see it show us its hand. And if you drop down the time frames, really what we'd have wanted to see was a lot more of a snapback than this. To be honest, you're probably just going to do something similar to what you did over here, and then you're going to get a next down leg, and then we'll probably look at what's going on and what kind of structure you're forming and how do you make that low and assess. If we think that's the bottom for Bitcoin, of course, we're going to be getting into altcoins. We've shared our altcoin or some of our altcoin lists on Patreon for anybody that's interested in joining the Elite Members channel. So for me, this is not a bottom. Not interested in calling it that. When I look at what's going on, the Hong Kong's Hang Seng index dropped close to 3% in mixed Asia trades as investor sentiment remains fragile. What's the reason? This is what you got to ask yourself, that Bitcoin just enters a bull market now and continues. What is the reason for that? I don't see it. And if you can, please leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts on it, because maybe you know something that I don't. But as far as I'm concerned, this isn't a clear bottom. Not interested in calling it one. Ultimately, we're going to see where Bitcoin goes over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, and then look to invest accordingly. And if we do get a sort of bottoming signal, then we will, of course, be jumping back into markets. And lots of people throwing around that the RSI and the weekly has never been this oversold. Again, really highlights the kind of sentiment that we're in, the kind of transition period that we're currently going through. It's a very, very harsh period for markets. And we did do that analysis on the Nasdaq yesterday, where we were essentially saying, look, guys, that this is the run up from essentially from the 90s all the way up to the dot-com boom. Look at where you are today, from the sort of crash in 2008 all the way up. Very, very similar structure. You've had this kind of huge move in momentum, huge blow off, very overextended. Is it that unlikely that you're going to come back below this and sort of get down? And you could potentially round trip from the sort of lows of March 2020. Not saying that's a definite, but it's certainly on the cards on something you shouldn't rule out. And this is what I mean. The risk is all to the downside right now. And you can see just how hard crypto is spilling this morning after getting that rally. It's almost like a reality check, a reality slap in the face that, look, why were you pumping yesterday when the stock market, when the Fed was being so aggressive? Nothing that they said yesterday made me dovish. And we've brought up euro dollars futures and a number of other things. And when you look at the altcoin market cap, excluding Bitcoin, there's still significantly potentially more downside to come for this. And we did say you would react off this 200 moving average because everybody's looking at it. Trading in some ways is quite a self-fulfilling prophecy in regards to the fact that people will. How many people do you think were looking at this 200 moving average? How many people do you think took shorts off at this 200 moving average, essentially taking the volume the other way? And that's something you've got to remember. Watch the dollar today. Dollar may continue going higher. We're also watching the likes of oil. They don't really seem to be taking the wind out of oil sales, to be quite honest. Is this just a support and resistance flip for oil? Terrible line. Is this just a support and resistance flip for oil? You've broken it as resistance. You're coming back. Maybe you're going to find it as support, and then you get that continuation. How does that tie into the inflation narrative? We know that nat gas had a significant sell-off, but it's still significantly higher than it has previously been. It's still relatively high considering this year, and that's kind of the case across the board. And of course, we are watching the bond market. Bonds seem to be going higher. They had a pullback yesterday. But this is what I mean. There was no reason for that pullback necessarily. Yet, you know, people seem to think that's the case. And the likes of Coinbase are going to be very interested to see how this opens, because ultimately we're expecting this to come down. We know that they reduced their staff by 18%. If Coinbase thought this was the bottom and they thought that the interest for crypto was going to become roaring again, would they really have just cut 18% of their staff? And this is what you've got to understand. So crucial to understand the environment that we're in, and that where all the risks are. And all the risks, even though Bitcoin is down, at one point it was down 71%. Today it's down 68% roughly. Even though we're down 68%, there's still, you know, you could still see significantly more downside. And people go, oh, well, if it's 68% down, it can only sell off, you know, 32%. That is not the case. You know, Bitcoin to get to 32% would put you at 14K. You know, there's nothing to suggest, depending on how bad things get, if we do see that move in the Nasdaq, which I'm not actually calling for, but I'm saying it is a possibility, you know, where does Bitcoin go to? And the problem with, this is always the issue with getting so much hot air pumped into markets, is on the way down, it doesn't really provide many areas of support, which is something that you've really got to pay attention to. Just like in 2017, issue you've got is you don't really, because you've gone up in such a fast manner, you don't really have many areas of consolidation that you can look to for support. That being said, 17, 18, 19K is what we're really looking at for the next move, in my opinion. We'll assess the market and then we'll invest or divest accordingly, and take trades on that, and potentially look for a short setup in the current structure that we're in. And I think that's going to look very similar in terms of a setup to what we had over here with this trend line. I think you're going to do something potentially similar here, but it's probably actually going to be a lot more short-lived. You know, you're going to do something like that before you see that continuation to the downside. That is all I've got for you in this video, guys. If you've enjoyed this content, a like is always appreciated, so is a comment, and I'll catch you all in the next YouTube video. Don't forget, there's a link to my Patreon in the description, and I'll catch you all in the next one, guys. Thanks a lot for watching.